It is so, I'm just, it's such a thrill to see everybody and to see so many familiar faces. That makes it a real special treat. You know, this is such a difficult time for all of us. And, we miss connecting, and we miss seeing friends, and we miss seeing family. And for those of us who are bookmates or Rob Goodwin guest readers, we miss meeting with our kids. So what we thought we'd do, kind of to thank you for all the work that you've done, that we tried to bring the read aloud experience to you in a slightly different. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading not a kid's book, but a kind of anticipate what we're going to be doing after I read the piece, rather than discussing it as a whole group. We'll break out into breakout rooms. Each room will have a specific issue to focus on. You'll have about 10 minutes in your groups to talk about the question raised that you have been given. And then at that point, after about 10 minutes, we'll all come back and we'll share the ideas that were generated in the rooms about the piece. Okay? So that's pretty much what's going to happen. So I scoured my files, my folders, my books about what I was going to read aloud to you folks today. And much to my surprise, one piece kept coming back to me over and over again. It insisted on being read. And it's interesting because it's not a great literary masterpiece. So the piece was written by hold your hats, a Franciscan nun. And it was written in 1991, and it appeared in a teeny tiny Catholic journal. But it obviously had so much resonance for people that the Reader's Digest grabbed onto it. And of course, Reader's Digest is always looking for interesting, compelling pieces that people are going to connect with. So it was published in Reader's Digest and received volumes of mail in response to its appearance. And then, do you remember this series, Chicken Soup for the Soul? Okay, so a zillion-dollar franchise. I mean, I can't even begin to calculate how many books the Chicken Soup for the Soul series has actually sold. It was then published in several editions, and then the internet picked it up. And it has millions of hits on the internet. And it's even been published internationally and translated internationally. So this little tiny piece written by a very humble Franciscan nun, who was, appropriately for all of us, was a teacher, has received this enormous attention in the 30 years in which it's last published. And in fact, I have a feeling that some of you, particularly those of you who are teachers, may very well have come across the piece at some point along the way. So that is kind of a little bit about the background and the piece is called All Good Things, and it's written by Sister Helen Mersola. All Good Things, written by Franciscan nun, Sister Helen Mersola. And here's the piece. He was in the first third grade class I ever taught. All 34 of my students were dear to me, but Mark Eklund was one in a million. He was very neat in appearance, but he had that happy to be alive attitude that made even his occasional misbehavior delightful. Mark talked incessantly. I had to remind him again and again that talking without permission was not acceptable. What impressed me so much, though, was his sincere response every time I had to correct him for misbehaving. He'd say, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." I didn't know what to make of it at first, but before long, I became accustomed to hearing him say, "Thank you for correcting me, sister," many, many times a day. One morning, my patience was growing thin when Mark talked once too often, and then I made a novice teacher's mistake, threatening something I wasn't prepared to deliver. I looked at him and said, if you say one more word, I am going to tape your mouth shut. It wasn't 10 seconds later when Chuck raised his hand and blurted out, "Sister, sister, Mark is talking again." I hadn't asked any of my students to help me watch Mark, but since I had stated the punishment in front of the class, I had to act on it. Without saying a word, I proceeded to Mark's desk, tore off 2 pieces of masking tape, and made a big X with them over his mouth. I then returned to the front of the room. As I glanced at Mark to see how he was doing, he winked at me. That did it. I burst out laughing. The class cheered as I walked back to Mark's desk, removed the tape, and shrugged my shoulders. His first words were, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." The years flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was again in my classroom, this time as a junior high math student. He was more handsome than ever and just as polite, and he didn't talk nearly as much in 9th grade as he had talked in 3rd. One Friday, things just didn't feel right in the class. I sensed the students were frowning, frustrated with themselves, and edgy with one another. I had to stop this downbeat mood before it got out of hand. So I asked the kids to list the names of the other students in the room on 2 sheets of paper, leaving a space after each name. Then I told them to think of one nice thing they could say about each of their students and write it down. It took the remainder of the period to finish the assignment, and as the students left the room, each one handed me the papers, often grinning from ear to ear. That Saturday, I wrote down the name of each student on a separate sheet of paper, and I listed what everyone else had said about that individual. On Monday, I gave each student his or her list. Before long, the entire class was smiling. "Really?" I heard someone whisper. "I never knew that meant anything to anyone. I didn't even know that others liked me so much." No one ever mentioned those papers in class again. I never knew if the students discussed them after class or with their parents, but it didn't matter. The exercise had accomplished its purpose. The students were happy with themselves and with one another again. Several years later, I returned from a vacation. My parents met me at the airport. As we were driving home, there was a slight lull in the conversation. Mother gave Dad a sideways glance and simply said, "Dad?" My father cleared his throat, as he usually did before something important. "The Eklunds called last night," he began. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them in years. I wonder how Mark is." Dad responded quietly. "Mark was killed in the war. The funeral is tomorrow, and his parents would like if you could attend." I had never seen a serviceman in a military coffin before. Mark looked so handsome, so mature. All I could think of that moment was, "Mark, I would give all the masking tape in the world if only you could talk to me." The church was packed with Mark's friends. Chuck's sister sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The pastor said the usual prayers, and the bugler played taps. One by one, those who loved Mark took a last walk by the coffin and sprinkled it with holy water. I was the last one to bless the coffin. As I stood there, one of the soldiers who had acted as a pallbearer came up to me. "Were you Mark's math teacher?" he asked. I nodded as I continued to stare at the coffin. "Mark talked about you a lot," he said. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to Chuck's farmhouse for lunch. Mark's mother and father were there, obviously waiting for me. "We want to show you something," his father said, taking a wallet out of his pocket. "They found this on Mark when he was killed. We thought you might recognize it." Opening the billfold, he carefully removed 2 worn pieces of notebook paper that had obviously been taped, folded, and refolded many times. I knew without looking that the papers were the ones on which I had listed the good things Mark's classmates had said about him. "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother said. As you can see, Mark treasured it. Mark's classmates started to gather around us. Charlie smiled and said, "I still have my list. It's in the top drawer of my desk at home." Chuck's wife said, "Chuck asked me to put his list in our wedding album." "I have mine too," Marilyn said. "It's in my diary." Then Vicky reached into her pocketbook, took out her wallet, and showed her worn and frazzled list. "I carry this with me all times," Vicky said. "I think we all saved our lists." That's when I cried, tears torn from deep within me. And that's the piece. Again, All the Good Things by Sister Helen Rasola. It cries out to be talked about, doesn't it? So everybody's on mute now. Oh, okay. So I had trouble getting through it, actually, reading it again. Oh my goodness, I see lots of emotional response there. That's why I selected it, because I think it does call upon something very primitive and eternal in human beings. And it brings up so many questions, I think, that are relevant for nowadays, for these very difficult times. So since, again, as I said at the beginning, since we are such a large group, I think the technology aside, I think it would be difficult for us to talk about it kind of in an unformed fashion at the beginning. So that's why we will break out into groups now. And essentially what will happen is, as I understand it from our resident maven, from Rhonda, that that Zoom will assign you randomly. All went well, the breakout rooms all went well. Great, I'm seeing some heads shaking, which is nice to hear. Just let me fill you in a little bit on how we're going to proceed. Then what other ideas you have, other thoughts you had related to the question that the group who's reporting is focusing on, okay? And then when that group is done sort of talking about the ideas that were emerged in their group, and the rest of the group has talked about any additional ideas that they have, then we'll go to group number 2, who do the same thing, report back, then open it up to discussion, and then we'll go to group number 3, 4, and 5, okay? So the main thing is, since the whole purpose of this is to connect and to enjoy each other and to have fun with each other's ideas, is to pipe in with as many thoughts as you have and as often as you do, okay? Have fun. First group is on.
Okay. All right. Let's see, the question that was assigned to group 1, why do you think so many people across the world find this piece engaging and meaningful? And we had some really, really good input in my group, lots of things. I tried to write them down as fast as possible. So I hope I'm gonna be able to get it all in. The first comment was said about how often do we hear a compliment from others. We like to be recognized, especially when you're in high school, you're 9th grade, and you want your peers to accept you and like you, and perhaps maybe the students who were more quiet and introverted, this was really a surprise for them, because you sort of think, oh, the person who's outgoing and vibrant and all, oh, they have all these friends. And so the quiet ones sort of stay in the background and not kind of worry about what other people think of them. So I think that positive, those messages or those comments made about that person made them really feel like, wow, I never really thought somebody thought that way about me. The next thing was that it sort of speaks to this universal need that we all seek approval, feedback. We want to feel the connection. It makes such a huge impact on not only how we see ourselves, but when we look at others, look at our peers. Reminiscent of yearbooks, if you go back into your yearbooks and you read what your friends thought of you then, and kind of interesting how you read it and then it makes you think, well, how do I want to project myself moving forward? What do I want people to see in me? Let's see. And it really, it's very inspirational too. I mean, obviously this assignment, I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit, so I apologize. The impact that this teacher had, you walk into a class, you're gauging the mood of the class, and this was not planned. It was sort of I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. She had no idea that what she did, what that would turn into, and how empowering and how life-changing the result of that. And I think it's kind of also speaks to teachers really don't know the impact that they have on their students. And clearly this was a hugely positive impact. And now when I was listening to the piece being read, I was picturing how she must have felt when she was standing there at the casket, and the other friends and the students and who were all there, and then how she must have felt when here's the paper that's revealed, and then someone shares, oh, I have it in my diary, oh, I have this in my wedding book. I mean, that just speaks volume to the impact that she had, that teachers have. Let's see, I hope I've said everything.
Super.
Yeah, I think I got it.
So anybody in the group like to add to what Leah said? If no one does, I had a couple of thoughts, because many of the points that you spoke about actually were the kinds of ideas I bet that came up in some of the other groups. So for instance, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip ahead to group number two. And the question, interestingly enough, for group number 2 was, why do you think so many educators, teachers, parents, read aloud volunteers find this piece engaging and meaningful? What I didn't say is that I talked about how many thousands of people, millions of people have read this piece. A large proportion, not surprisingly, are educators. Why don't we move ahead to that second group in talking about why do you think so many educators find this piece engaging and compelling? And I think much of what you've said in the first group, Leah, was completely appropriate, and I would imagine reflects the ideas that came up in group number 2 too, also.
Great.
So great. So group number 2.
Question was, why do you think so many educators, teachers, parents, read aloud volunteers, etc., find this piece engaging and meaningful? So like Judy said, it's a similar question, but sort of more directed toward the teachers. and the volunteers. And we all, of course, agreed that, validation is important for all kids, particularly the kids that we work with. And, the goal is to make them feel better about themselves and maybe in that way treat other people better. The comment that struck me the most came from somebody who was a teacher in the group, who said that teachers, I wrote it down, learn to say even negative things in a positive way, which I thought was a very interesting, comment, and something that I'd love to learn how to do better. Frankly, personally, I'm not an educator. And then we sort of veered off into some conversations about some of the challenges that we saw the teachers in the schools that we're working in facing, that might be a little bit different than the challenges of teachers in a Catholic school where there may be a little bit more discipline, and how we'd all seen teachers in our schools who were just phenomenally patient with kids every day, running up to them and hugging them and clearly loving them, and the teachers being very, very effective educators, but also witnessing teachers who had more struggles dealing with the kids in the classes. And I think many of us have also witnessed that. There are classes that some of us have worked with many special ed kids. They can be a challenging bunch. And I think some of us have also observed teachers who have to spend so much time disciplining that it's hard to, I would imagine, focus on the classwork. And, just on a more personal level, I think we've all personally also experienced up and downs with the particular students that we've worked with. I think we all try, and often it comes very naturally and reflexively, to provide the sort of validation that, the piece talked about. And other times with some kids, it's not quite so easy and natural. And, I kind of walked off wondering, well, how can I as a volunteer do better at that with kids where it isn't as reflexive? So that's sort of what I took away, but I'm open to other people in the group tossing in other comments.
Okay, Audrey.
Thanks. This may sound very egotistic, but as a teacher, getting notes from a parent at the end of the year or during the year just take you up to cloud nine, and they show their appreciation, and it's something that keeps you going and going and going and going. And so I personally could associate with the sister, because having just recently moved, I could not throw away those letters. So I don't know what my kids will do with them when they have to clean me out, but it's still such a high to receive that kind of actually accreditation to what you've been doing all your life.
Audrey, the rest of you, I had exactly the same experience during this downtime for all of us. I actually started cleaning out file cabinets and drawers, and I came across my letters from students. And I first of all, I just cried like a baby reading them again. And it felt so wonderful, because we all need validation. We all need recognition of our worth and affirmation. So, and the other thing that hit me, so Leah, when you were talking about sort of the life-changing impact of a teacher, which is exactly what you folks are talking about in the second group too, that I think you talked about that she did this activity on the spur of the moment. And there was something serendipitous about it. And that was even more magical, because it wasn't thought out. It just happened, and it took off in ways she never, ever could have expected. And so when you talk about that, reading a story like this does make you think, as you said, that how can you do better? How can you provide more often in your life, not just to students and not just to young people, just in everyday situations? How can we be kinder? How can we be more affirming? How can we be more validating of people's experiences? I have to tell you about something that I saw a zillion years ago on Oprah that always stayed with me. Oprah, she had, and I'm sure you all know the terribly beleaguered, sad life that Oprah had as a child. And when she was a very, very small girl, she was as smart as a whip. And in her church congregation, she was what I guess is called the reader. So this little pipsqueak of a kid, when visitors came into to her church, she was trotted out to read the Bible text of the day because she was such a engaging little girl and she was such a wonderful reader. And one day she was a real little girl, but had already suffered sexual abuse and tremendous trauma in her life. And she also was very aware of the fact that she wasn't a pretty little girl. And one day on a Sunday, it was during election season, the guy who was running, the man who was running for governor of the state, I don't remember what state it was, but it was a southern state, and he was a white guy. And he and his wife came into the church to court the black vote. And Oprah was trotted out that day, this cute little girl, to read the biblical text. And she was feeling very proud of herself, but also very aware of the fact that she didn't look as pretty as she wished she looked. After she read the text, the governor's wife came up to her and said, looking down at her, said, "You are as cute as a speckled pup. You are as cute as a speckled pup." She didn't know what a speckled pup was, but she loved the feeling tone behind the compliment. And she knew it was a compliment, and she liked the word cute. And she felt that something internally inside her changed that day, that there was a new way of thinking about herself. And she had really marked this as this teeny little moment of serendipity. She thought of it as a watershed event in her life. Her producer tracked down this wife of the governor, I see shaking, brought her to the show and surprised Oprah with her appearance. And the floodgates just opened of emotion. And everybody in the audience was crying and remembering, their similar events that they had or hadn't had in their lives. But the point being is kind of what you're both saying, that these events, they're tiny. They seem tiny, but they're not tiny. And it's just certainly an accumulation of tiny events can go a huge way in shaping how we feel about ourselves. And I think that's one of the power of being an educator, certainly. And that's what the parents, Audrey, your parents are acknowledging, the power of little tiny moments, in the classroom. Yes, Shirley.
I learned over the years working with the children, and it's been since 2001, that sometimes there are files in schools that mark the children as being disruptive, and those remarks go on year after year, and teachers, when they see the file, form a judgment. And what I liked about the nun and her love for this little boy, excuse me, was the fact that even though he disrupted the class with his talking, she still loved him. She loved him just the way he was. And even in 9th grade, remembering back to the episode with the tape, excuse me. So I feel like her loving unconditionally was the reason why she did such a nice positive thing. And in fact, it all came back to be a positive for her at the end, unfortunately at his death. But I often thought, the children are just innocent kids. They have what they have because they're from where they come from, and they're not our children, and we don't know what they've experienced at home. And it's a pleasure to get positive feedback from them. And that's why I continue to do this almost 20 years later.
Bravo. Bravo. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other comments? Yes, Judy.
Along the line of the teachers looking back and reading the kids' files, we had one little boy one year, and his teacher it was a second grader. His teacher was one of these old-fashioned, older teachers who never got out of her chair. She just handed out his assignments. And she said, I'm giving you this child, but he's a real troublemaker. So he came out. The child was whip smart. He could read everything. He devoured. And I think he was a problem because she didn't want to teach separately to him because he was so much brighter than the other kids in the class. He ended up being sent to the behavior school in Camden for disciplinary problems. But he was so good with us because he was so willing to learn. He wanted so much, a good word for him, some extra help for him to go ahead. He would have been a different child. That child was ruined by what they were doing because he was marked as a bad kid. And there was so much to him. And what you're saying about being the good kid and giving him the stuff. And this was years ago, and it still breaks my heart about what happened to that poor child. Yeah. And a lot of the parents don't know to go into the schools and fight for their children.
You just mentioned something, and I may have the term wrong. The Rosenthal effect in education. Those of you who are educators, I think that's what it's called, that children live down to the labels that have been applied to them. It's true. Anyone else? Any other comments? And Rhonda, who's the?
Hi there. So I'm group 3. Our question was, Sister Helen says she cried, obviously for Mark, but what other reasons might she have had for crying? So obviously, the first one was obviously she did lose somebody she loved and she had known for many years, and that's sad. But one thing we all talked about, it was that everybody remembered her one act of kindness, her one moment that she took time in class to kind of separate from teaching and do something to involve everybody, get everybody to think about each other. And it stuck with the kids for years. All of these nice words, like you're saying, that people wrote about them, stuck with them for years. When the kids are in 9th grade, and as Leah had said, 9th grade is a horrible year for children. But then to receive all of these positive words from so many other people or so many of their peers, they kept these notes with them for so many years. And they took this activity to heart, and they kept it for the rest of their lives, and it really affected them in a positive way. Again, one random act of, I'm kind of going through my notes looking back and forth. The one random act of kindness leads to so much more than she had expected. And I think she was overwhelmed when she saw that there were so many kids and so many of her students kept those notes. She didn't do it to have an impact on the rest of their lives. She did it for that one moment to make the class a little happier. And it really affected them. And we had talked about it's like the domino effect, or if you throw a stone into the pond and it ripples and ripples and ripples. And this was really one of those. All the kids mattered. All the kids benefited from this. And her project took on a life of its own. Group helped me. Does anybody have any else to add? I think Beth? No?
No, I think you did. No, you summarized it up nicely. How we had just all talked about that. Just this, this unexpected gift that came back to her, and how it resonated in her, and just not necessarily filled her up with tears of sadness, tears of happiness that she had made that impact.
The validation that she wanted her students to experience, she experienced. Now to talk about the circle, like a circle of kindness, kind of.
Yeah.
Joan?
As I recall, you had indicated, and that's what I also took from the piece, that the nun was reading the room and sensed something kind of odd in the mood of the room. And I was saying in our group, in a different sense, that's a tough thing to do, and very clever of her to react to it. And unless there's a real extreme tragedy or something that affected the whole school or community, and you can't miss it. Generally, that's a tough thing to do because teachers are very much, this is what I have to cover today. Will this be in the test kind of thing? Is the state looking for this information? So to take the time to read the room and know that you needed to do something else that at that moment. And I believe you said, and I felt the same way, that it was an extemporaneous, just spontaneous idea to do this that had such lasting impact. So I think on BookMates, on a one-to-one, maybe it's a little bit easier because you guys are so wonderful at understanding the kids and know that what they heard in their house that morning, an argument or lack of something to eat, or something else that affected the child, maybe on a one-to-one, BookMates have that advantage and can read the child and kind of alter the lesson that might have been in your mind as you understand what the kid, the child might be feeling. And the other thing I just want to say, as a human being, as a former teacher, as a mother, as a grandmother, as his friend, it's amazing that we all talk so much, and you never know that tiny bit of negative or that tiny bit of positive that came out of your mouth, what that did to the recipient. Could be good, could be a bad, and it could be totally not something you're aware of.
And anybody else from the group or outside the group? Yes, Elena. Adina.
And again, just sort of following on the same theme, I'm finding this really helpful to hear as a bookmate, just because it's such a fun program, but I often feel like it's like, just for me, I enjoy it. I love working with the kids, but there are many times that it's, I'll say to myself, I can't really be doing much for these kids because I'm there half an hour a week. And what kind of an impact can that have even over the course of a year? So to hear these stories and, the Oprah story that really one comment could stick with somebody throughout their lives that's good to hear, because makes you feel a little bit more like,
Anyone else from the group or outside the group? Contributions, ideas? Yes, Leah.
Just what Adina just had shared about causing you to reflect on how we make an impact, even though we might be reading to our student for 30 minutes a week. In the beginning stages of when you're trying to get to know each other, you sort of kind of have some doubts, but then before you know it, week after week passes and they look forward to seeing you. And all of a sudden you feel so very special because you know that you're making this positive impact. They look forward to seeing you. They are super excited. They can't wait to see you next week. It becomes routine. It becomes something that they can look forward to. And it gives that structure. And it's such a positive experience. So then it's just this really rewarding thing. And also when you read that, or you shared the story about Oprah, which I didn't know that, but how a perfect stranger, somebody she never had seen in her life, even with the nun having all the years passed and then these people sort of coming together, just that that one comment or that one gesture or something was just planted this seed of greatness on the inside of them. It was like this life changing, this amazing, having Oprah hear from a stranger to say, oh, you're such a cute, and just that word that she loved, cute. And then all of a sudden she's so surprised. She's like, wow, somebody thinks I'm cute. Then that it just took on this power of its own. It's magnificent to just those little things, the comments. It can have a positive impact or it can have it could go either way. But in both of the story from the nun and Oprah's story, it's sort of amazing if you think about how our actions and our words can have an incredible impact on others.
Those who have heard me talk at various times when I've made different presentations about the way our work impacts upon the architecture of students' brains, that really that's what you're talking about, is that children who are being brought up in trauma, there are all kinds of changes in their brain that work against their success in school and in life. And particularly if the kids don't have supportive, encouraging parents, or parents who don't talk with them a lot and there isn't a give and take and reciprocal communication, kids really, some bad stuff happens in their brain. I mean, that's part of the reason why their behaviors are so out of control, because the parts of the brain that keep children focused and on task and determined and resilient, that all those parts of the brain shut down. And we provide a new way. I love what you said about planting seeds of greatness. That's really, it's incredible. That's really what we're doing in our own little way. And it's not such a little way. That these small gestures of kindness and focusing on them and talking with them and admiring their cute little new sneakers and the bobs that they have in their hair, all that changes in the heart, and it calms the cortisol that's coursing through their bodies, and so that other parts of the brain that have been disengaged are engaged to their benefit. So, we do a lot. Yeah, Judy.
So I had a third grader, a little girl. His mother was shot and killed in front of her about 3 weeks before I started with her as a bookmate. And that was the reason the teacher gave her to me as a bookmate. And the first meeting I had with her, we use a library there for bookmates. She was at the far end of the table. And each week she got a little closer to me. And I think it was because this was the only place where she could have one-on-one attention, because every place else there were other people demanding attention. By the third week or the fourth week, she was literally in my lap. And that's the way it stayed. And we didn't discuss what had happened. It was just all about her and what she liked and the kinds of stories she wanted to hear. But from the first day to the end of the school year, the child was a different child. But it was that one-on-one. I mean, she was just so depressed and so off. There was obviously a real sadness about this child, and I was the only one able to give her one-on-one attention, because at home there were other people. She was being shifted here and there. In the classroom, there were 25 other kids, and she came, and hopefully it made a difference.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Okay. Wow. Okay, that group 4.
Our question was, do you think this piece has special relevance during the pandemic, and why? And had a lot of stuff to talk about, but one of the biggest things that this piece, I think, showed us that during this pandemic, especially with so much going on, is it brings into focus what's really important, which is positivity. It even helps us to follow the advice of the mental health experts that we hear on the news or on the radio or in print, to watch the news sparingly, but concentrate on the positive. And some other things, the way we perceive ourselves is not necessarily how others perceive us. And it's affirming to learn the positive attributes that others ascribe to us that we might not recognize in ourselves. So, a way to turn that around to our students and to our loved ones and to pretty much complete strangers, I think, is that we should be sharing that positivity. It also helps by thinking of the positive and bringing a focus onto that. It helps to learn more about each other on a personal level. So I think that's, again, something that we can use with our students there. And one of our members of our group had a really great story about how their family each shared something positive every single day about the quarantine solution. So again, it's not all bad. We're not stuck inside with nothing to do getting fat. The father he had the opportunity, because he was working from home, to watch Sesame Street with his 4-year-old every day. What a positive thing. So focus on that kind of stuff. And that's something I think probably all do a little bit better. And sometimes the smallest thing you can say, just like we've talked about, sticks with people. Good reminder to keep it positive and keep it hopeful, and to lead with kindness. So those were the notes I captured. I don't know if any of the other 4 ladies wanted to jump in with anything else that I missed.
I love that phrase that you just had used, Jen. Lead with kindness. That's a wonderfully simple, succinct, meaningful phrase. Jen, I want to go back. You also said something about kindness not only to family and to loved ones and intimate circle, but to strangers.
Oh yeah.
You want to talk
I've
about?
actually stopped people in the supermarket and said, "Oh my gosh, I love your jacket."
Yay.
And then I'll see them like half an hour later at the checkout and they're still smiling and gushing to their husband about the jacket.
Yeah. Yay.
I have something I want to add to that really quick, just quickly. Because we're all seeing each other on screens and it's FaceTime and all this. When you are actually in a store, like Jen just said, you don't even have to know the person. It's like, wow, I see a human being. And when you say something to someone, we all are feeling like, oh my God, I don't even have to know you, but I like talking to you like you're a person. So maybe it's these acts of kindness or these comments that we're saying, and they're very simple, but wow, you just appreciate it so much. And just being able to see another person, as you say, and have a conversation. It could be something just totally random, but you just take good from that.
I find it hard that, I do the same thing. I go when I talk to people, but you can't see the smile, and
You have our masks on.
Everybody has a mask on.
Right.
You try to make a funny comment. I'm not sure if anybody gets it.
That's great.
Any other questions, or anyone else want to add?
I want to continue just for a second. There's something that just struck me so profound. I thought it was such a profoundly generous-hearted thing to do. And we've started doing it here with some reluctance, but we have started doing it. You're seeing people who were invisible before. You're seeing the grocery clerks, and you're seeing the delivery people. You're seeing even the people from Amazon, the people who were unseen before. You're now realizing they're essential to the way we live our lives. They are essential workers in a new definition of essential. And I saw on TV a guy who was a man who, to thank the person who was delivering his food from ShopRite, he wanted to give something to them to show how appreciative he was. And so what he did was he gave them a roll of the precious toilet paper that none of us want to give up. And I thought, wow, that's a gesture from the heart, not the tuchus. That is a major generous-hearted gesture. So my husband and I had a long discussion. Early on, we got a lot of toilet paper, and we really probably have more than we need. And so we've started doing that. We've started giving toilet paper for
So funny.
And I'll tell you, it feels really good. And they are so appreciative. But it seems like such a real world way to express thanks. And then you think of all the people in cities throughout the country, particularly in New York, the 7 o'clock, pounding their dish pans and their bells and all these thanks to the, the flying overhead, which I also am in disagreement with, but the acknowledgement of the acts of wonder that, for instance, that frontline medical workers, for instance, are rendering every day under the most hideous of circumstances. But we do see people differently. Anybody else on group 4?
Yes. So our question was, what can we do to foster in ourselves and in young people the ability to express appreciation and gratitude? Our group, and as we so overlapped with all of the other comments that have been made already, but we discussed how the story depicted the level of this teacher's generous heart. Judy, you just used those words, but that's exactly the words that were used in our discussion. And her appreciation of and connection with her students, illustrated, for instance, by her wonderful reaction to the wink that Mark made after she took off the tape. And these feelings of appreciation and gratitude were ingrained in her, and she was able to convey those feelings and extend those kinds of concepts to her students in a very effective way. We turned in our discussion to the impact that the BookMates volunteers felt when they walked into their classrooms each time. And they recall how very happy their students, and you've just discussed this in other contexts as well, how happy those students to see the volunteers, to connect with them, and the volunteers each convey a very positive feeling about being there, and that comes back to them in a very positive way. The students are thrilled to see them. They feel the appreciation and gratitude from the students. Very positive vibes. One of our members called it a Mr. Rogers effect, a verbal acknowledgement of gratitude, of paying it forward in effect, which is what the teacher did and what the students experienced and took with them on. So I'm happy to have anyone supplement my notes if they have other comments to make.
From the group, anybody else would like to say anything? Yes.
I would like to share something that someone just made a comment and brought it to mind. In my experience with BookMates, I had one teacher requesting me come back over the years, and then the other teacher came back to our school, and so I had for several years, 2 or 3 years, I had both teachers. So I had 2 hours, 2 children from each class, because I couldn't say no to either teacher. And then the second teacher, or the one that took over when the one got transferred, gave up her regular class. She's a specialist, English as a second language, so she has no class this year. So I'm back to one teacher, the same teacher that I've been with for more than 10 years. But in the midst of the pandemic, I got a text from Lisa, the English as a second language teacher. How am I? Can she do something for me? Can she shop? I was really blown away, really very, very touched. And she's staying in touch. She continues to email me, to check on me. Now, I'm a widow, I live alone. She knows that. And we've established a wonderful relationship, as I do with most of my teachers, although it's only been the 2 teachers, because I continue to go back, because they ask me to come back. But I'm really very touched by it. She's really a wonderful girl and very thoughtful. So I just wanted you to know that, these type of relationships happen over there.
Audrey.
That Judy Nadell and Helen Kirschenbaum and Rhonda Chevron are getting the feedback from us about this program and just bursting with pride, because this is the most amazing group, and the hard workers that get it all going. It's given all of, I'm going to speak for myself, given me, and from what I can glean, everybody else, so much pleasure and so much happiness being with the children and in the classrooms. I just wanted to say thank you, Judy, thank you, Helen, and thank you, Rhonda, and all their helpers.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you. Thank all of you.
Thanks. I really appreciate that.
From an early age, just one thing I want to add. From an early age, I experienced my mother volunteering. So it was sort of second nature, to give of myself. And I often say that it's the people who don't do this that don't realize how much they get back by doing it. There's so much to it, and there's so much, I mean, it's as much for me as it is for these children, because I just love it. And I feel sorry for the people that can't step outside of themselves and their own needs to do it. I really think it's a valuable thing for anybody. Volunteerism.
These are rousing endorsements. Thank you. And when I opened today and I said how much we miss being in the school with our kids, I think we all do. We all do. Anything else from Group 5? Okay, well, I would close with just a personal anecdote. I sort of debated whether I was to tell you about this, but I think I've decided yes, because of so many things that you've all been mentioning. So I am going to end with a little bit of a personal story. A couple of years ago, several weeks after my 50th college reunion, which I hadn't attended. Out of the blue, I received an email from the most memorable professor I had had in college, a renowned, internationally respected scholar. Quite frankly, my comment when I saw his email was, how the hell did this happen? So what had happened, although I hadn't gone to the reunion, we had had a reunion book, and in the reunion book, I had written, as long with everybody else, like a brief biographical update on my life, which is quite something to do 50 years after the fact. And I had written, as part of my update, I had written not a lengthy, but a very, very, very brief reference to this professor, and citing how stimulating his classes had been and what a sly wit he had. He had seen the booklet and had seen my comment, and my teeny tiny little comment to him, this world-renowned professor, prompted him to get back to me 50 years, half a century after I had had a class with him. And what he said in his email absolutely wiped me out. He said, among other things, he said, thanks for remembering me. And I thought that he gave voice to everything we've been talking about today. He gave voice to the fact that there is this elemental yearning in all of us for recognition, for affirmation, for validation. Even when you're an internationally respected scholar, that feels good for the soul. And in our own way as bookmates, and that's what this piece is all about, we provide that kind of validation and affirmation. And we all need to feel that we're seen, that we're heard. And that's what Bookmates is all about. So bravo to all of you for making this enormous contribution to the richness and the texture of these kids' lives. So this has been a fabulous experience with no technological glitches even, which is amazing.
We got lucky. We got lucky.
Good job,
And it's such a delight to see so many familiar faces. And I've learned so much more about so many of you, which makes it, even more wonderful experience. And I guess maybe we will continue doing something like this while the pandemic still has its hold over us.
Thumbs up for Judy. That's an absolute. Thank you so much, Judy. It was fabulous. It was really.
I loved it.
It was great.
Yeah. Thank you, all of you, for participating, really.
Yeah.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.